Hey there, fam. Let's talk about Palestine, shall we? Sorry about the wobbly. Turns out there are exactly zero places to put this little external light that make this low production value setup any more flattering than it is, which it's not. But that is good thing. This is not my career, isn't it? Okay. Palestine, you guys. Um, I have thoughts. I have lots of thoughts, and I have been trying to start discussions with people in this direction, and I'm not really getting any engagement, which I find to be weird. And of course, Medium is never going to circulate anything on this topic. Medium doesn't circulate any of my posts anyway because they don't conform to the narrative. So, but please do go on and support my Medium page under Adventures in the Free World. I'm a pretty good writer. There's good stuff on there. It's worth reading and circulating. And Medium is definitely not going to do it for me. So, most recently was my open letter to Cornel West called Dear Dr. West. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff on there. I have not written anything on the Palestine situation as of this point. But so I'm going to put a whole list of channels in the video description that you guys can check out of international independent media that I have found, which has been very good and very insightful. So if you guys have not noticed this, I mean, this is a really small channel, so there's like 10 of you watching my videos, but I really only post a video when I have things to say that I'm not seeing already being discussed. Channels that have bigger viewership, like if they're already covering the same stuff, I feel like there's kind of no reason to tread the same ground. So I have put together a lot of thoughts about the situation in Palestine and what it says about the direction of the world heretofore. And I wanted to kind of share these with you and see what you guys think. And I encourage you to check these channels out that I'm going to list and really take a look at this. So, where to even begin? Okay. Well, first things first. I have never seen such a global outpouring of love over anything, any cause ever. Oh yeah, look at my my Free Palestine nail job, you guys. I wore this to my student recital this week. I wore my kufiya and a red top and these lovely green earrings and an event that was completely not political at all and had a whole bunch of people's family and friends there in attendance. So this week I was a resistance of one. But hey, I mean, the more we put this stuff into people's consciousness, um, you know, repetition is how things start to get programmed into us, right? So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, people can't see these and Palestinian colors and flags enough. I digress. Okay. So here's my take. The winds are changing in the world. The winds have been changing for quite a while. I have been seeing this in areas of the news that much of the left, in my observation, has outside of their awareness. So, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that I don't know too many leftists that have a thorough understanding of U.S. monetary policy. And monetary policy is so fundamental to everything else that it's impossible to come up with a coherent strategy for leftist mobility or policy implementation without understanding how the money works. I mean, it's really not. So that's probably a subject for a whole different video. But to explain, let me, so contextually, so before the attack in Gaza, here's what has already been happening. the Biden administration has been accelerating things that were already underway. One of those primary things has been that the world is getting away from the US dollar as the dominant currency. So I'm not going to get into a whole big explanation of the petrodollar economy here. There's plenty of resources available for that. But as we are not taught anything about the petrodollar, the short strokes are that there was a thing after World War II called the Bretton Woods Accord, which is where it began under the Franklin Roosevelt administration. The administration decided to start, really reneging on agreements to pay debts to other nations out of our gold reserves. The United States didn't want to lose our gold reserves, and so other nations were calling loans due, and the Roosevelt administration said, how can we figure out a different thing to tie the dollar to other than gold? But fast forwarding to 1970 under the Nixon administration, Nixon and Kissinger did two very significant things that have affected world economics ever since. The advent of the neoliberal project started under them, and the advent of the real petrodollar system. So Nixon went to the House of Saud, to the king, and made a bargain with the devil, where he said the United States will give you unqualified access to weapons and support for anything you ever want to do in perpetuity, as long as you secure the agreement of all of the OPEC nations to only sell oil in US dollars around the world. So that's had a disastrous impact for the rest of the world and really only been beneficial to the United States. And the rest of the world has been getting sick of that. When Biden decided to start a proxy war with Russia, which I just want to remind everybody that really started with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton actually started the war with Russia, which she was going to do had she won the election. That was the thing she was going to do. That was one of the reasons I didn't vote for her. But she got her war with Russia anyway, because she managed to conjure up Russiagate and manufacture that and reignite the Cold War and 1950s McCarthyism and manufacture consent for everything that's happened since. So, I mean, don't imagine that the American public would have jumped on board with this proxy war in Ukraine in the same way had they not already been conditioned into Russiagate for years before. So regardless, Biden started a war with Russia. He blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And what he has done is accelerated other nations' motivation to start forming alliances with each other and get away from the influence of the West. This happened for a lot of reasons. I mean, it caused a major oil crisis among the European nations, especially Eastern Europe. And also, people were just already getting sick of us. So all of the alliances that the Pentagon has been trying to continually break up and disrupt and prevent from happening for decades of geopolitics through constant intervention in other people's elections, assassinating leaders, starting proxy wars, funding militias, installing dictators, all the things that the Pentagon has done for a century, or over a century, really, on behalf of the U.S. empire, finally got people fed up and caused these other nations to decide to unite against the bully. So things that have been in motion and that have accelerated since the Biden administration have been the BRICS alliance, which was originally only 5 countries, BRICS being an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. The BRICS alliance now has 15 nations that have joined, including Saudi Arabia. So I'm just going to pause for that one to sink in. Saudi Arabia, the #1 ally in the Middle East, that the Nixon administration created the whole petrodollar economy with, has now joined the Alliance of Nations that has agreed to dump the petrodollar and start selling and trading oil in other currencies. All of them, 15 nations have joined. They're getting away from the IMF now and joining a international bank they created called the New Development Bank. Those things have been in motion for quite a long time. So, for anybody who is unfamiliar with the petrodollar, the short strokes of the impact of this really cannot be overstated. The reason that the United States has been able to get cheap goods and services from around the world for decades, the way that we have, which affect every aspect of our lifestyle, including among the working class, has been because all of those nations have been forced to sell us their stuff cheaply in order to obtain dollars so that they can dump those dollars back into Wall Street and buy their oil for their nations. The only reason the dollar has been the world reserve currency and had any value at all since 1970 has been because of the petrodollar system. It has long been predicted by economists like Michael Hudson that as soon as the dollar hits below 50% of the world reserve currency, the American economy will completely collapse as we know it and never recover. So that is happening now. We are very close to being below 50%. If you want to see the daily updates about what's been going on with the world economy and the US dollar, I very strongly recommend that you visit Lena Petrova's channel. She is a CPA, so certified public accountant. She kind of does these news briefs, very factual. She doesn't really give any, editorial on it at all. She just follows what's going on with the world economies and she presents them. Nations have been dumping U.S. debt at unprecedented rates never seen in history. They're dumping U.S. investments. They're dumping the dollar at lightning speed. And this is not something that this is not going to change. This is not like, oh, it's just a phase, right? This is a permanent shift in the world economy to a multipolar world whereby the global south and Russia and China and the Middle East are now uniting against the Western empires and embracing a world that is collaborative and cooperative with each other for each of their own nation's good, and nobody is the dominant power. That's the direction things are going, and it's moving very quickly. Outside of the view of most Americans, which is unsurprising. I mean, the Romans at the end of the Roman Empire didn't know that it was the end of the Roman Empire. I mean, they just kept living their lives as if everything was business as usual, or saying, times are bad right now, but they're going to get better someday. So it's really not surprising. But and I promise all of this does tie into the shifts in the world and what's happening with Palestine. So all of this is related, guys. But I just wanted to give you some of this background because of the way that these things are so intertwined. So another thing that leftists have not been paying enough attention to has been the transition to CBDCs, which is central bank digital currencies. That is worthy of a whole other video too. CBDCs are bad news. Everybody should be vehemently opposing them. It should be at the center of every single one of these independent candidates' presidential campaigns, and it's not. That really bothers me that Cornel West, Jill Stein, and Kennedy are not talking about U.S. monetary policy at all. They're not talking about CBDCs. But the fact that the U.S. dollar is tanking is the reason that the Western economies and the countries that are allied with the United States, along with the U.S., is now looking to transition as rapidly as possible, without our consent, irrevocably, into a digital currency that is completely owned and controlled by the federal governments and completely ban cash. The reason why is because cash is going to have no value. When the U.S. dollar comes to its swift end, the U.S. dollar isn't going to be worth anything. And so, this has been a controlled demolition of the economy for a while. The pandemic was used as a controlled demolition of the economy. There's a lot of really sinister things at play, but with this transition away from the Western empires, we are already very rapidly losing legitimacy. And the final nail in the coffin is definitely, I think, going to be the U.S.'s rabid support of the Holocaust that Israel is now visiting upon Gaza and the West Bank. So, um, why am I convinced that this is actually changing? Well, let's start with the global outcry in support of Palestine. Um, there is a channel, it looks like it's maybe from a guy in the Netherlands named Haber Lutfen. He's been posting live footage of every single protest that's been happening everywhere. I have been watching all of them because it is helping to restore my faith in humanity and alleviate a lot of my cynicism and sense of despair over what's happening in Palestine. So, and I do find it very uplifting. At this point, I have lost count of the number of cities and the number of countries in which these demonstrations, and I mean large scale demonstrations. I'm not talking about a few hundred or a couple thousand people. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people each, everywhere, all the time for 35 straight days on every continent and in just about every country. All over the West, all over the Middle East, everywhere. And there hasn't been a single demonstration that I can see on behalf of Israel other than the tiny number of counter protesters that have showed up along the sidelines waving their little Israel flags and saying their normal ignorant things about Israel having a right to defend itself against the people that they have colonized and committed genocide against. So I've never seen an outpouring of support this big over anything. I was old enough in 2003 to see the protests against the Iraq invasion. The Occupy movement, the George Floyd protest, all of those things were, wonderful outpourings around the world of support and solidarity, which were really encouraging and ended up kind of not doing anything. The Occupy movement didn't change the banking system. The Iraq protests didn't stop us from, decimating 3 different nations over a 20-year period at the tune of several $trillion. And the George Floyd protest only revealed Black Lives Matter to be a totally corrupt organization and, caused the Trump administration to become increasingly hawkish against leftist dissent and, promote this whole narrative that everybody that protested against racist police violence is, Antifa. And then all we got to do was watch the squad approve more funding for the police and do absolutely nothing. So it sucked to watch these kind of brief rises of public support for things and get hopeful that they're going to maybe move things in a more progressive direction for the world, and then see them just kind of die off and then everything go on business as usual. So I could understand people who think that that's going to be the same way with the outcry over Palestine. But after spending quite a bit of time perusing many, 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 many independent media channels, including many Middle Eastern media channels where even the titles of the videos are written in Arabic and I can't understand them at all. I encourage you guys to check those channels out because, guys, first of all, there's Google Translate. And then also, if you go to the YouTube subtitle settings and you select auto translate and you switch it to English, you can get enough of an English translation that is, accurate enough with like 70 to 80% accuracy to be able to have a sense of what's being said and at least be able to identify what country the thing is in that you're watching. So the momentum is really shifting, especially because the Western countries, like all of Europe and the United States and Canada, has had such a huge outcry against this genocide. It is clear that the media establishments in these countries have lost all legitimacy. All legitimacy. The government's position on Israel has lost all legitimacy, and there's no coming back from this. Israel has permanently lost the argument, which I'm borrowing that from the title of one of Caitlin Johnstone's many articles that she's put out since this situation. But they really have permanently lost the argument. I mean, the narrative around Israel being the victim in this conflict has completely collapsed. And it's collapsed with people that are just been absolute shit libs on everything else. I mean, like the worst kind of shit libs, like the rabid Biden voting, calling Bernie Sanders supporters every name in the book, and just deliberately being willfully blind to every single thing that's wrong with Biden and the Democrats. Like those shit libs are now getting on board with supporting Palestine. So on this issue, and I wish I could say it was translating to everything else, time will tell about that. But on this issue, there is a mass awakening going on around the world, and it is an awakening on the scale of which I don't think that people are going to go back to sleep. I really don't. And I don't think the momentum is going to stop. I mean, in countries where protests are outright banned, particularly Germany and the UK, they have made it illegal to protest in support of Palestine, and multiple cities in Germany and the United Kingdom have been in the streets shutting things down nonstop since October 7th. I mean, multiple demonstrations in different forms. I mean, in the UK, in London, they have shut down multiple major train stations that are central to people's daily commutes. They've shut down the media stations. They are starting to unite across the labor unions now and putting pressure in a unified fashion on the corporations that they work for. Um, Over a week ago, they already had over 500,000 demonstrating in London, and then yesterday the protest in London was now estimated to be over 1 million people. Like they literally shut down the entire city, and it has been relentless. And there have been other protests in cities all over England, the Irish Parliament, in Ireland, in Dublin and Belfast, in Scotland, and then the soccer leagues over there. I mean, the proper name being football. The football leagues, you can't see a single football game between, the nations that play football, which is all of them except the United States. You can't see a single game that isn't filled with Palestinian flags and Palestinian colors, both in the stands and on the teams. Even though the league has banned these things, like they're relentless. It is everywhere. In Central and South America, there have been massive protests in the major South American countries, Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, in Santiago in Chile, Bolivia, Uruguay. I mean, it has been everywhere. These countries have been withdrawing their ambassadors from Israel and cutting ties with Israel. There have been protests that a huge scale. I can't even imagine. I mean, at least 300,000 or 400,000 people each in multiple African nations, in West Africa in particular, in Ghana, Kenya, Morocco. North Africa would be Morocco, Algeria, Egypt. I mean, from like when you see the aerial footage of these, it really looks like the whole country is in the streets because it's just a sea of people for as far as you can see. There's been over 30 cities in Canada demonstrating. There have been multiple demonstrations now in the U.S., including 350,000 people at the Capitol last Saturday. Demonstrations in New York that have shut down the Brooklyn Bridge. They have gone to the BlackRock corporate offices. They've been in the lobby of the New York Times. There's been on college campuses all over. It is just a massive, massive, massive outpouring of support across every kind of spectrum. Like, I've never seen this amount of diversity in one place ever. And very notably, a lot of these protests are organized and led by multiple Jewish organizations. I don't even know the names of all of them, but there's Jewish Voices for Peace is a prominent one. The Hasidic Jews, I don't know if that's a proper name for them or not, but like the Orthodox, the ones with the big furry hats and the curly cues and all that, like they have taken a prominent position in these protests. There have been a lot of people who are Holocaust survivors, obviously in their 80s and 90s, or descendants of Holocaust survivors speaking out. Um, it's just been like near unanimous support on every continent among wide swaths of the public. And that is to say nothing of the mass resignations that have been happening among UN officials, ambassadors to the UN, people resigning at mainstream American media outlets, within the American State Department. And then there's a bunch of dissent on the Capitol among staffers of various congressional representatives. There's been an outpouring of support towards Rashida Tlaib, even within Congress, even though it's a small, faction of Congress, because they've censured her. This amount of pressure that is being sustained for this length of time has to shift something. Like, no matter how stubbornly the Western governments are sticking to their positions in the face of this stuff right now, it's not going to last. It just can't. I mean, 2024 is an election year. Biden will lose the election over this. I wish I could say that the Republicans were any better on Israel, but if you've listened to any portion of the Republican debates, they're all awful. So every single one of them is a psychopath, and they're all saying things like Gaza should be turned into a parking lot. Yeah. But so I'm not saying that anybody better is going to get elected to office in the United States that's going to be any better on Israel. But I am saying that the governments, like it or not, I don't think are going to be able to continue pushing this kind of policy for much longer, because people just aren't having it anymore. But now, let us talk about the Middle East, shall we? The Arab world and what's going on in the Arab world is really interesting. I would not proclaim to be an expert on the Middle East to any extent at all. But, my understanding of the geopolitics of the Middle East from having followed, several people who are experts. I mean, I've listened to Danny Haifong's show and people that he's had on. Breakthrough News with Rania Khalek is a great source. Al Jazeera, including Al Jazeera English, has been pretty decent. Sometimes Democracy Now!, The Gray Zone, as well as international media channels, like one I found recently called Middle East Eye, has been really good, as well as TRT World, which is a Turkish news channel. So there have been a lot of splits among the Arab nations. Many of them aren't speaking to each other. There are the disparities that have been largely inflamed and created by a century of American interference in the region, that has caused or inflamed all kinds of conflicts between the nations over there in order to purposely keep people divided. And then there's the whole Sunni versus Shia Muslim thing, and the nations having different economic interests and all kinds of stuff. And so, in previous times where the conflicts in Gaza and the West Bank have gotten bad with Israel's aggression, the Arab nations have not necessarily stood up against Israel or taken a particularly strong position. At least they've definitely not taken a united position. That's been a source of pain for Palestine, obviously. And then also a lot of times they have tried to pressure each other to just take in Palestinian refugees as if the solution to colonization and ethnic cleansing is to just say, well, yeah, everybody should just leave and go live somewhere else then. I mean, which it's not. That appears to be changing very significantly. the outpouring of support, I feel like I've been saying outpouring of support a lot in this video, but the outpouring of support from the streets in all of these nations is huge. I can't even quantify it. I mean, none of the channels on which I've been watching live footage of these protests has posted the number of people that are in the streets. At least I haven't seen an English translation. Any of you who speak Arabic, you might be able to discern that. But I mean, drone footage and camera footage from like multiple angles in major city centers in Jordan, Yemen, Syria, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, the Arab, the Arab nations or the Muslim nations on the African continent, particularly North Africa, like Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, Iran. The number of people that have been demonstrating and shutting down city centers and demanding that their governments intervene on behalf of Palestine is in the millions for sure. I don't know how big, but it's big, and they're putting relentless pressure on their governments. Many of these nations have a huge Palestinian population, particularly Jordan, Yemen, and Oman, because of prior exoduses where Palestinian refugees have been forced out of their own country. But even in the countries where there have not, leaders of organizations that have been labeled by the West as terrorist organizations, which really are not. They're simply they're high-level military operations that have positions within the governments of these countries and sponsorship by the governments of these countries. So Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, which are primarily in Syria and Yemen. The leaders of these organizations have made very public statements to the world saying that they are prepared to support Palestine at any cost, and that they are no longer afraid of the West or of the United States. And they've issued strident statements telling the U.S. to back down, even as the Biden administration has parked an actual nuclear sub in the Middle East in one of the waterways. I don't know the waterways over there besides the Strait of Gibraltar. I know there are significant waterways. He's parked an actual nuclear sub as a way of trying to intimidate these nations and keep them from getting involved. And in the past, it's my understanding, according to, I think, Richard Medhurst and some of Danny Haifong's guests, that Iran and Lebanon in particular and Egypt have been hesitant to get involved because they have their own problems in their own countries right now. And they have not wanted to get into a hot war with the United States. However, they've all been making pretty clear statements that this holocaust in Gaza is a hill that they are willing to die on. And the Arab nations are uniting around that pretty clearly. You can go on several of these Middle Eastern channels. Al Jazeera English has posted the speeches of these leaders with translators doing audio translations into English. Middle East Eye, TRT World, those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Novara Media is another one, and then many, like I said, of these Middle Eastern channels where everything's just in Arabic and you kind of like do the auto translate thing. They have been posting these speeches. You can watch these speeches from the leaders of the different Arab nations yourself. On Al Jazeera English, there was a long one that is 24 minutes of the Iranian Prime Minister speaking at a very significant summit that was just held in Riyadh this week. And it was hosted by Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who unfortunately is the guy who dismantled the journalist Jamal Khashoggi with a bone saw while he was alive, and given a pass by the Trump administration. Unfortunately, he's in charge over there. But he was the host of this, and Every single leader, prominent leaders from all of the Muslim nations in the Middle East and North Africa were in attendance at this summit. And you can watch the speeches of all of them. You can also watch summaries and breakdowns and analysis by these different channels. Al Jazeera English did a breakdown that was about 7 minutes. The one that I would really recommend listening to is this guy, Shahid Bolson, whose channel is called Middle Nation. Um, he's given really excellent critique. Evidently, if you do a Google search of Shahid Bolson, all kinds of things will come up, but there's a video on his channel where he addresses all those things. Frankly, I don't give a fuck. I can tell who's speaking the truth and who's not. I know enough about geopolitics in this country to be able to listen to any source, regardless of how that source has been labeled or what its reputation is, and be able to tell whether or not I'm listening to the truth or whether they're full of shit. So that is the benefit of understanding how the system works through a longer lens, and like reading actual books and investing in a proper education of the American empire and its geostrategic policies over more than a century, and monetary policy, because once you understand how the game is played, you can read the patterns anywhere, and you don't have to worry about being susceptible to whether or not a certain source is credible or not, because you can take every single thing they say one by one and be like, well, they're full of shit, or, well, no, I mean, they got all kinds of crap on their channel that's obvious bullshit, but on this one thing, they are absolutely speaking the truth. So Middle Nation gave a really interesting breakdown. This guy Shahid Bolson is a insightful guy on the Middle Eastern situation. They are uniting against the West. That's where I am going with this. There were calls at this summit for oil sanctions and oil embargoes against America, against the West. The Indian channel WION did a segment about how West Asia and now other Asian countries and countries in Central and South America are joining in boycotting U.S. companies. Because they all know that the U.S. is behind this Holocaust in Israel. So, I mean, the global perspective among the citizenry is that the U.S. and Israel are no different from one another. They are all sick of the West. They see the U.S. is directly responsible for what's going on in Israel. They all know that a single call from the Biden administration and shutting down the constant support with weapons and money to Israel by the United States would put an end to this in a day. Everybody knows that. And so they're uniting in boycotts against U.S. companies. The leaders of these Arab nations are now starting to engage in a series of talks that are underway right now about what actions they plan to take against the U.S. So not only have they all issued their own statements, where the unified message is that they are absolutely decrying this as a genocide. They have unanimously called Israel a illegal settler colony that has been there in Palestine illegally for over 75 years. They are decrying this as a genocide and a Holocaust. They are saying that there are no justifications for it. Israel is not the victim, and they absolutely must unite together in support against the Western empires on behalf of their Palestinian brothers and sisters. And these leaders are suggesting decisive actions that will absolutely have a sizable impact on the United States and possibly other Western governments. As far as I know, this has never happened before. So, the world is moving away from the U.S., guys, very, very quickly. I mean, Russia and China are offering huge amounts of assistance right now. in their humanitarian initiatives toward Palestine. There are a lot of alliances that they've been forming with the Middle East nations for economic and other reasons. Um, the multipolar world is definitely, it's here. And the end of the United States as being this number one dominant world superpower is here. And I mean, the Biden administration has done a lot of things to accelerate this fact, all of which I've already covered. But the fact that he is refusing to back down on his support of Israel is, I think it's the beginning of the end for the American empire. And as far as I'm concerned, that can't happen fast enough. I mean, none of us are getting any kind of benefit whatsoever from being the number one dominant world power. And any of us who are on the real left defined as anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, so ergo not people who vote Democrat, not even progressive Democrats, I mean the real left, along with a large portion of libertarians, libertarian socialists, even a lot of portion of conservatives now who, have different reasons than we do for why they don't want to be floating these endless wars. Um, you know, None of this is benefiting us. The American empire's constant wars for the endless domination of resources and labor around the world and control of the world's economies has not done anything for us in decades. And um, the thing that I find scary about it is that, absent of sustained mass civil disobedience, which Chris Hedges has been saying is the only solution for a very long time, the rich and the people who are pulling all the strings and causing all the destruction are just going to pass all of the suffering down onto us. When we start running out of resources, when we start running out of water and food, when the dollar collapses, the authoritarian um, and fascist lockdowns and militarized control of the public, including now controlling our money through forcing us onto this digital currency that they fully control in order to shut down our access to resources. Well, that's why all this stuff is taking place, because the powers that be know that the end of the U.S. empire is coming, and they're not going to stop. They are absolutely willing to get us all killed. They're not going to stop. I mean, look at what Rome and all these other empires before did, right? They doubled down on these horrific positions because the people who have all the money and the power have already set up their doomsday bunkers. I just ran across a video um, in, I think, Sweden. It was like a tour of all of these doomsday bunkers owned by the rich. And there are so many of them. There's a lot of videos with tours of these things. And, these people, like Jeff Bezos and stuff that have been trying to go to space. Why do you think they're trying to go to colonize space? Because they're not going to stop destroying Earth. Like, they know that Earth is being destroyed, and they know that Western societies are coming to an end, and they don't fucking care. They're going to try and extract everything that they can out of us until there's nothing left, and then they're going to leave. And it doesn't look like they're actually going to be able to live in space, but they do have all kinds of private militaries. They've been hoarding resources, they've been hoarding water, they've been building their bunkers, and they live in a complete state of delusion. And they don't care about the rest of humanity at all. So the downside of the coming end of the empire is that I think it is unfortunately going to come with a lot of chaos and suffering passed down onto us. However, the empire also needs to come to an end. So it's a double-edged sword, right? And to take some hope away from this, the mass awakening that I'm seeing and the unified outpouring of love that I'm seeing on behalf of Palestine is really encouraging to me because, I mean, humanity really may surprise us yet. And, that's what I've been hoping for. I mean, part of why I follow Caitlin Johnstone isn't because she speaks the truth, what she does, but occasionally she will publish these things where she has this optimism that people are smarter than the establishment gives them credit for, that there is a mass awakening going on, that the elites are losing control of the narrative, and that love may really win in the end. And I think it is possible that humanity may surprise us yet. And that's the thing that I want to leave you guys with, is that above all, as I've been watching the situation that has developed in Palestine, which is truly horrific, as we all know, um, looking at the diversity coming together in support of Palestine, you know, this this may be the thing that unifies people in the way that we have needed people to become unified against the Western empires. This really might be the thing. I mean, I was hoping that George Floyd would be the thing. I was hoping that the Occupy movement would be the thing. And those weren't the thing, you know? But looking now at the just gigantic, disparate organizations that have been organizing these things, like in DC, there were like 4 different First Nations tribes speaking on stage at the rally before they started to march. Multiple Black liberation organizations, including the Dream Defenders, feminist organizations, Jewish Voices for Peace, I think I already said Jewish organizations, but youth movements. I mean, people that all voted for Joe Biden, like I already said, people that have been Republicans. I mean, it is just coming from everywhere. It is just coming from everywhere. And there is this mass awakening where people are starting to see the Western empires for what they really are. And completely withdrawing their belief in these institutions that have been running things for so long, like the media establishment and the governments. And I don't think that that belief or that support is ever going to return. And I don't think that this momentum is going to stop. So, unfortunately, it's not going to bring back the dead. And I don't think it's going to end the Holocaust in Palestine today. And I think that there's going to be a lot more death and destruction before this all plays out. But, multiple people that have just kind of been speaking into the camera and posting on social media from Gaza and from Palestine, have said that no matter how this plays out, if the end result is a free Palestine, it will have been worth it for them. Even the people who have been losing their families, even the people who may lose their own lives. I mean, to me, that sounds very sad and tragic, but they're saying that if this plays out in the end with a free Palestine, um, ultimately that that will be worth it to them. And for massive systemic change of societies, they usually do require a really huge catalyst and a lot of disruption. That's just kind of, you can see that all over history. Like a system that has had a chokehold on a people for decades does not go away quietly. And I do think that this might be the end. I mean, I really think that this could lead to not only a free Palestine, but to a multipolar world where the United States is forced to just acknowledge that it is just one among 198 other nations. And that opens up a lot of opportunities if we are organized, and I think there's never been a larger call for people who are on the left that have been hoping for this kind of change for a really long time to start getting our shit together and start having conversations across the different factions of the left and coming up with strategies that can actually build broad coalitions. And that means with people we don't like, and with people that say things that we think are really shitty and that we disagree with, and people that voted for Biden, and people that voted for Trump, and people that we think have said racist things in the past. All those people, you know, it's going to take a giant show of solidarity around common cause. And the opportunity is there if we seize it. I don't know if we will. I mean, we may all go down fighting. I've listened to Chris Hedges. I mean, the most influential Chris Hedges book for me was the book he wrote called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. And when he talks about so many revolts around the world, often that where the cause was just absolutely futile and yet people went down fighting. And he talks about this moral imperative of revolt. It really gets me choked up when I think of that, and that there is this like inherent dignity and meaning in resistance, even if it is a resistance that can't be won. I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't think any of us does. At this point, I think it just kind of hangs in the balance where it could go either way. But it is very possible that humanity really could surprise us all. And I would love to see more conversations about that on the left. I'm not seeing it discussed. I mean, I have a very strong ability for pattern recognition and to kind of scan information from all kinds of disparate sources and start connecting dots into kind of what the meta patterns are, and what seems to be happening on a macro level. And I've tried to engage people in conversations about that on social media and with some of the other leftist media channels, and written to them and said, hey, this is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? And nobody's really responding to me, and nobody seems to be talking about it. So I don't know why that is, but I think it would be very productive for us to start taking a look at how these dots connect and saying, where can we add our support into this? How can we help to fuel this momentum? One of the things that any one of us can do right now is support all of these tiny little channels, these international media channels that have been posting these video clips. I mean, there are some really heartbreaking ones too. I mean, I've been watching the clips of the protests, but also like Middle East Eye and TRT World has these really short 1 and 2 minute clips filmed by people in Gaza from their cell phones. And there was this little kid holding his cat and talking about how he rescued this cat from the rubble, and how the animals are just all terrified. And he tries to comfort his cat as much as possible, but the cat's like scared all the time. Animals are my really big weak spot. I mean, and these kids like holding up a sign pleading with the international community to help them. And doctors in the hospitals, like, the hospitals have totally collapsed at this point, and we can show our love by supporting these channels and by circulating these videos and keeping it in people's faces. Like, we have to keep talking about Palestine, no matter what the censorship does, no matter what the Western media establishment does. We have to keep talking about it and showing them, people in their own words, in Gaza. I mean, because when you see these human beings, I mean, it will break through people's delusions slowly but surely, and just to circulate that so that their voices are heard, so that they know that they are being heard, and they know that they're not alone. People who are posting this stuff on their channels are taking a lot of risks, especially on YouTube. We can also track down the organizations that are helping to sponsor all of these demonstrations around the world. We can find out who these organizations are. We can circulate their social media. We can donate to them if we can. We can spread the word about them. Heads up to everybody if you haven't heard of Shut It Down for Palestine. And that's with the number 4, not the word 4. So shut it down for Palestine.org. There were global actions coordinated for November 9th through that website that happened all over the place. And there is another set of global actions that is taking place scheduled through that organization on November 17th. And you can go on shutitdownforpalestine.org and you can either join actions that are listed or you can register your own action. And of the list of suggested actions they even have small things such as wearing a kufiya, which is this. And, and I mean, sometimes having a protest of one is all we can do. I mean, I have a Palestinian flag. I've been hanging it outside my apartment. I wore my kufiya to school every day this week, and this t-shirt, and I have my nails painted, and for my student recital last week, which was a formal recital, completely not a politicized event at all, I had on a dressy outfit where I had on a red top and this kufiya and these green earrings. And I know that friends and family in the crowd for the different performers, there were a few people who recognized what was going on. I mean, how can you not recognize this at this point? Even if you've seen like a small clip on CNN, like these are everywhere, right? By the way, if you buy one of these, I hate to say this is from China, which sucks, but it was a gift from a Palestinian woman at a local shop, because I went into her shop hoping to find one of the ones from, apparently there's only one company in Palestine that still even makes the genuine kufiya. And she wasn't selling them, she was selling these, but she gave it to me as a gift. But, I mean, they're all over Amazon if you just want to get any kufiya from anywhere. But the corporation that still makes the genuine ones is called Habawi, Habawi, I think. They have a lot of beautiful stuff on the website about like the history of it and the significance and the symbolism of all the things in the print and whatnot. They're sold out and they're taking pre-orders. But if you want to do that, give your money to Palestinian companies. They also sell Palestinian olive oil on their website. Sometimes all we can do is what we can do as individuals if we can't find other people united in solidarity. But sometimes that is enough to get a conversation going, and one more organization, if you've never heard of care.org, or no, not .org, that's something in California, care.com. So it's CAIR. Can't remember what the acronym stands for. They are either national or international. They provide legal support and other support for people who are experiencing Islamophobia or reprisals for speaking out on behalf of the Muslim world or on behalf of Palestine. They have lawyers. They have a lot of good information on their website. They also have local chapters. So when you go to care.com, you can find like a chapter that is closest to whatever state you're in. Donate to them, get their updates, support them. They have information about how to organize demonstrations and actions, how to interact with the police, what the police can do, what they can't do. A lot of really good stuff on care.org, and that is also where you can go to report events. So if you see Islamophobia, if you see any kind of aggression against people protesting on behalf of Palestine, care.org is where you would go to report that. They're keeping track of all of the incidents. So that's a wrap for this one. This is longer than I had planned. Hopefully some of you guys have found it worthwhile to listen all the way to the end. I hope that you will choose to circulate this video and and start conversations with people. Check out the other media. Um, and I will, like, I'm not gonna go and copy and paste links for every single thing, but I will post a list for you guys in the video description. So, also, one last thing. The protests in Washington, D.C. last weekend with around 300 or 350,000 people, Status Coup News caught all of the speeches from the rally, every single one of them. So it's like, it's a long thing, it's a 3 hour live stream, but you can go on to Status Coup News if you want to watch the whole thing. I found the speeches to be really inspiring. The panning around the crowd, the roar of the voices was just so encouraging to me. And then Breakthrough News was also there. They kept their internet kept buffering during the rally, so they weren't able to catch the rally. But if you fast forward to about an hour and a half into the video, they did catch the march. If you want to watch the march and the interviews that they got, and then Vice News, which is oftentimes pretty propagandistic. Like Vice isn't always great, but Vice was there and they did like a half an hour special on that rally and featured interviews as well. So I feel like the more of these videos that we can find, and we can boost the algorithms by liking them, leaving supportive comments on them. You never know who's reading these comment threads. Sometimes you'll see a lot of ignorance, and sometimes you just inform people by leaving something that is counter to that narrative, and you never know how, who's going to be reading it. I mean, people wake up one at a time, and they wake up at their own pace, and it sucks that they don't wake up at our pace. I mean, I'm constantly aggravated that people don't wake up at my pace, because if everybody had woken up at my pace, Bernie Sanders would have been the president in 2016. And regardless of the fact that he did turn out to be a total sheepdog, he had a hell of a grassroots movement that would have kept pushing him, and a lot of momentum to do a lot of things. And there is many, many things about the last 8 years or so that have happened that I don't think would have happened had Bernie Sanders actually taken what I feel is his rightful place in the White House. So we do what we can, man. And I want to leave you guys with this too. I know I said it was a wrap like 5 minutes ago, and now I'm still talking, but here we are. There is, from an esoteric standpoint, there is a lot of power behind masses of people united in consciousness for a cause. I mean, resistance is not good. Like if there was a global, outcry organizing protests against Israel, it wouldn't have the same effect. I mean, everything you resist gets bigger. So that's why the war on drugs has only worsened that situation, and the war on terrorism has only worsened that. Everything you resist persists. But it's been shown through many people who have done a lot of research in fields like quantum physics, and people who have studied things like meditation and group prayer and all this kind of stuff. There is now measurable data to prove that when there is a clear intention combined with a strong emotion, that actually alters the electrical charge that is coming from our brains and our hearts. And when the electrical charge from the brain becomes coherently aligned with the electrical charge from the heart, Joe Dispenza calls it heart-brain coherence, toward a clear positive outcome around which there is a very strong emotional connection, it does alter things. And so the other reason that I find this so encouraging to see the support all over the world in support of Palestine is we now have millions of people who have a very clear intention that they want to see the decolonization of Palestine and the liberation of the Palestinian people and an end to the violence. And that everybody is sharing a whole lot of feeling and a whole lot of love behind this. And when we are united in consciousness at these demonstrations like this, it cannot not have a real effect in shifting the energy of the planet. I know some of you may be really skeptical about that, but I will stand behind that. And I find that to be very hopeful and encouraging and inspiring. So, with that, I'm going to leave you all to your thoughts. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments, and I will see you again on this channel sometime. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.